Happy Sabbath. I hope you all had a wonderful week. And I pray that you felt God's presence and you received His blessing. And tonight, I continue to ask Him to give you love, joy, and peace. Right now, we're in the book of Exodus. Last week, we started chapter 1, and tonight it's going to be chapter 2. Last chapter, we read Pharaoh had the intention of killing every Hebrew male baby and let every girl live. He wanted to wipe out the male babies so that the Hebrew people, descendants of Israel, could no longer perpetuate. In another word, he wanted this group of people to be extinct. Now, it is interesting to note that the girls or the daughters who Pharaoh kept alive were the ones who spoiled Pharaoh's plan. These daughters, just like the midwives in chapter 1, helped to preserve the lives of the Hebrew male babies. Besides the midwives, there were Miriam, sister of Moses, Jochebed, the mother of Moses. Moreover, the daughter of Pharaoh and her maidens also defied the plan of Pharaoh. They saved the Hebrew male baby who became the leader of the great Exodus. So let's start reading verse 1. Now a man from the house of Levi went and took as his wife a Levite woman. The woman conceived and bore a son. And when she saw that he was a fine child, she hid him 3 months. The Levi couple's names were Amram and Jochebed. It did not mention in this chapter, but it will mention in chapter 6, verse 20. Levi was the 4th son of Jacob. And we know that eventually the descendants of Levi became the tribe of Levi. And they were chosen by God to bear the responsibilities of the religious service, which we'll talk about later. In other words, the tribe of Levi were priests. But at the time of Moses' parents, although they were from the tribe of Levi, the assignment was not yet given. This Levi woman gave birth to a male child. That was bad news because according to Pharaoh's command, he needed to be exterminated. The women didn't want to give up this baby because he was precious to her. She treasured him. She hid him in the house for 3 months. Why only 3 months? Perhaps as the baby matures, his cries become stronger and louder and more insistent. Therefore, the mother can no longer hide him in the house. Verse 3, when she could hide him no longer, she took for him a basket made of bulrushes and daubed it with bitumen and pitch. She put the child in it and placed it among the reeds by the riverbank. And his sisters stood at a distance to know what would be done to him. So, what did the mother do? She got a papyrus basket and coated it with bitumen, which is tar and pitch, and put it among the reeds. The location could be along the river Nile. Do you recall Noah also used tar and pitch to coat the ark? We recall that the ark saved Noah and his family, right? So what is the tar and pitch? The tar and pitch are dark and sticky, and it is used to prevent water to get into a boat or a container in those days. Well, here the baby's basket was like a little ark. It was a little ark of salvation to save the baby. However, you might have heard some interpreters suggest that Jochebed, the mother, was afraid of Pharaoh's punishment, and so she put the baby on the water, let him die by exposure or starvation. But a lot of scholars disagree, because if that was true, if that was the mother's intention to let the baby die, why would she send the baby's sister to watch the little ark? In sending Miriam there, it shows the mother wants to save the baby. She put the baby into the river was an act of obedience to Pharaoh's law, but it was a calculated plan, in my opinion. Her intention was to preserve the boy's life in whatever way that she could. Verse 5. Now, the daughter of Pharaoh came down to bathe at the river, while her young women walked beside the river. She saw the basket among the reeds and sent her servant women, and she took it. When she opened it, she saw the child, and behold, the baby was crying. She took pity on him and said, "This is one of the Hebrews' children." The princess went to the river to bathe. Like all princes do, she brought along her female servants and maidens. She saw the basket in the middle of the reeds, and she told the maidens to fetch the basket. When she opened the basket, she saw the baby. I imagine this is what she said. "Oh, a little baby boy. Oh, look, the baby is crying. This is one of the Hebrews' baby." And she was moved to compassion. Verse 7. Then his sister, Miriam, said to Pharaoh's daughter, "Shall I go and call you a nurse from the Hebrew women to nurse the child for you?" And Pharaoh's daughter said to her, "Go." So the girl went and called the child's mother. And Pharaoh's daughter said to her, "Take this child away and nurse him for me, and I will give you your wages." So the women took the child and nursed him. When the child grew older, she brought him to Pharaoh's daughter, and he became her son. She named him Moses, because she said, "I drew him out of the water." The sister of the baby came out of her hiding place. No longer watching at a distance, she joined the ladies with their oohs and ahs and trying to figure out what to do with the baby. At the end, the princess decided to keep the baby. That would go against the command of Pharaoh, right? And in a sense, Miriam, the sister, was also one of the conspirators, working with the princess together to go against Pharaoh's command. But she was not afraid, because the situation has changed, because she was working for Pharaoh's daughter, who was the one that is leading this conspiracy. And then the conversation switched from what to do with the baby to concern about feeding the baby and the need to find a nursemaid. Well, the next part, you'll probably clap your hand praising Miriam for her bravery and smart move. She told the princess that she knew someone who could do the job. And so she quickly went home to fetch her mother, who is also the baby's mother, right? And Pharaoh's daughter accepted the baby's mother as the baby's nursemaid and even promised to pay Jochebed. These arrangements were surely God sent. He not only preserved Moses' life, but also ensured his protection and continued life. Most importantly, the baby Moses, was able to return to his own mother. The princess named the boy Moses, meaning she drew him out. She meant out from the water. A double meaning is at work here, since Moses will later be the one who draws out the people from Egypt. When Moses grew older, the Bible didn't tell us how old he was, but an author called Ellen White, the author of the book Patriarchs and Prophets, suggests he was about 12 years old when his mother brought him back to the princess. Moses is now living among the royalties at the palace, and he received the highest civil and military training because Pharaoh had determined to make his adopted grandson his successor on the throne. And this is what Stephen said later on in Acts chapter 7, verse 22. And Moses was learned in all the wisdom of the Egyptians and was mighty in words and in deeds. So Pharaoh was preparing him to be his successor. Verse 11. One day when Moses had grown up, he went out to his people and looked on their burdens. And he saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew, one of his people. He looked this way and that, and seeing no one, he struck down the Egyptians and hid him in the sand. When he went out the next day, behold, 2 Hebrews were struggling together. And he said to the man in the wrong, "Why do you strike your companion?" He answered, "Who made you a prince and a judge over us? Do you mean to kill me as you killed the other Egyptian?" Moses remained at court until he was 40 years of age. And while he was living in the luxurious palace, he did not forget the poor and lowly condition of his own people. And he frequently visited his suffering Hebrew brothers in slavery. And he encouraged them with assurance that God would deliver them, according to Patriarchs and Prophets. Often the sight of injustice and oppression would hurt him deeply, and anger would burn inside him. He vowed to avenge their wrongs. One day he saw an Egyptian beating an Israelite. He saw that no one was there to intervene, and so he struck down the Egyptian. The passage indicated that, except the Israelite, there had been no witness to the incident. And so Moses immediately buried the body in the sand. Again, in the book of Acts, Stephen interprets Moses' motivation. Acts 7, verse 25. Moses thought that his own people would realize that God was using him to rescue them. However, Moses' act was not appreciated because the Israelite or the Hebrews were not yet prepared for freedom. On the following day, Moses saw 2 Hebrews fighting, and one of them evidently was at fault. So Moses scolded the one who was at fault. And the wrongdoer right away retaliated and accused Moses, "Who made you a prince and a judge over us? Do you want to kill me too, like you killed the Egyptian?" Let's continue reading. Then Moses was afraid and thought, "Surely the thing is known." When Pharaoh heard of it, he sought to kill Moses. But Moses fled from Pharaoh and stayed in the land of Midian, and he sat down by a well. It was clear that Moses' way of human violence would not be God's way of deliverance. God had not called him to use violence. In fact, Moses' own people were hostile towards him. The whole matter was quickly made known to the Egyptians and probably greatly exaggerated. And soon this news reached the ear of Pharaoh. It was represented to the king that this act meant much, and that Moses probably designed to lead his people against the Egyptians, to overthrow the government and seat himself on the throne, and that there could be no security for the kingdom while he lived. So it was at once determined by the Pharaoh that he should die. Moses, becoming aware of his danger, he made escape and fled toward Arabia. In the Arabian wilderness is where God prepares him for the next chapter of his life. Verse 16. Now the priest of Midian had 7 daughters, and they came and drew water and filled the trough to water their father's flock. The shepherds came and drove them away. But Moses stood up and saved them and watered their flock. When they came home to their father Reuel, he said, "How is it that you have come home so soon today?" They said, "An Egyptian delivered us out of the hand of the shepherd, and even drew water for us and watered the flock." He said to his daughters, "Then where is he? Why have you left the man? Call him, that he may eat bread." And Moses was content to dwell with the man, and he gave Moses his daughter Zipporah. She gave birth to a son, and he called the name Gershom, for he said, "I have been a sojourner in a foreign land." So Moses arrived in Midian by a well, and 7 sisters came to fetch water for their father's flock. Unruly shepherds bullied these sisters who were daughters of Reuel. Well, Moses defended the sisters. And this act demonstrated that Moses' sense of justice was still there, still intact. But he had learned a more controlled way of force. He controlled his anger. He didn't kill anyone this time. So where's Midian, and who are the Midianites? Midian was located in the northwest region of the Arabian Peninsula. And these people, Midianites, were a nomadic people. They live here, they live there, and they were sometimes associated with the Ishmaelites. In Genesis chapter 25, verse 2-4, Midian is identified as a descendant of Abraham and Keturah. Who is Keturah, if you remember? Abraham's wife after Sarah passed away. Now let's go back to the story. So the Lord was leading Moses, and he found a home with Reuel. Reuel also has another name called Jethro. And who is he? He was the priest and prince of Midian, who was also a worshiper of God. After a time, Moses married one of the daughters of Jethro, and they had a son called Gershom, meaning I have been a sojourner. Sojourner, meaning a person is residing either temporary or permanently in a community and place that is not their own. And it was here in the wilderness of Midian that Moses remained for 40 years, serving his father-in-law, watching over his flocks. Verse 23. During those many days, the king of Egypt died, and the people of Israel groaned because of their slavery and cried out for help. Their cry for rescue from slavery came up to God, and God heard their groaning, and God remembered his covenant with Abraham, with Isaac, and with Jacob. God saw the people of Israel, and God knew. The Pharaoh whom Moses knew died, and the people continue to suffer. They cry out to God for rescue, and God heard their prayers. The time has arrived for God to deliver Israel. Who did God choose to lead the deliverance? The deliverer God chose no other. He chose the shepherd Moses, not the crown prince Moses. He chose the changed Moses, who is now humble enough to receive instructions from God. Summary. What have we learned from this chapter? Number one, although God didn't speak in this chapter, but we could clearly see his protective hand to save his people from the cruelty of Pharaoh. Number two, the last chapter we read that orders were issued to the midwives to destroy the Hebrew male babies at their birth, right? So who engineered this plot? Who is behind this? The author of Patriarchs and Prophets said, Satan was the mover in this matter. He knew that a deliverer was to be raised up among the Israelites. And by leading the king to destroy their children, he hoped to defeat the divine purpose. Satan also knew that if he succeeded in destroying this nation before he actually established, he will thwart God's plan of salvation for men and for women. Number three, we know that God has the upper hand. He always had the upper hand. He knew God's guiding hand was there even before Moses was born. It was certainly a miracle that Moses could live with his family openly for 12 years and receiving education from her mother about the Hebrew God, the only God. Number four, this narrative also shows us how far-reaching was the influence of that one Hebrew woman, even though she was an exile and a slave. The whole future life of Moses, the great mission which he fulfilled as the leader of Israel, testify the importance of the work of the Christian mother. And this is what the author Ellen White said again. She said, there's no other work that can equal this. To a very great extent, the mother holds in her own hands the destiny of her children. She is dealing with developing minds and character, working not alone for time, but for eternity. She is sowing seed that will spring up and bear fruit, either for good or for evil. She has not to paint a form of beauty upon canvas or to chisel it from marble, but to impress upon a human soul the image of the divine. Especially during the early years, the responsibility rests upon her of forming the character of her children. The impressions now made upon the developing mind will remain with them all through life. Finally, the fifth point. God didn't just choose Moses and let him be the leader of Israel the next day. God started to groom Moses since he was a baby. He allowed him to live with his own parents for 12 years so that he could know God, the true God of Israel. And God planned for him to be educated in the palace, to be instructed by intelligent men with knowledge that he will need later. And finally, he was instructed by God in the Midian desert to change his attitude. And he became a humble and patient man.